Welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about the antipodal powers of the mind today. And as you remember from the first session, we had started with the mind principle being the connective principle of the human being to the divine as well as the infernal in man. And we had asked the question as to why this was. HPB tells us in The Secret Doctrine, Mr. Judge explains to us in many of his articles that the mind is dual when we are in incarnation on earth or another sphere, and that it is necessary for us to understand this duality in order to know who we are. Because according to the Master's message, this is the most important aspect that we need to learn. Who are we? Why are we here? What is our place in the universe? And what is the highest that we can achieve? In that talk, we had also said that the principle of God, which is prevalent in all of the religions of today, has anthropomorphized this principle and made it a gigantic entity outside of ourselves. In Theosophy, we talk about an omnipresent and omnipotent God or deity, however or whatever word we give it. The significance of it is that this internal power of spirit and matter has to be understood, and that it is a spirit that gives all of the powers of nature their essence, and that the mind is also empowered by the same. The spirit has to use the mind in order to make its presence known. So, if we follow the spiritual aspect of this mind principle, then we will know that our mind is divine, and when all of its powers are activated, then it has become the mastermind. And I have to erase this, so put it in your minds. What do we mean when we say antipodal powers of mind? In the first talk, we had defined the opposites, which are necessary for our evolutionary process, because without the opposites, we cannot perceive anything. Light has to exist so that we know darkness. Goodness has to be there in order for us to perceive evil. So we explained that in detail last time, and this time we're not going to go into it. So here we go. How are the antipodal powers of the mind different than the opposites? Because anyone with average intelligence knows what is good, what is bad, what is love, what is hate, what is wellness, and what is sickness. These are the opposites. They're very discernible in our lives. But when it comes to the mind principle, these are very subtle. Subtle. So today, we're going to touch a little bit on faith, belief, that we had already touched on last time. What's the difference, should we say, between faith and belief? Well, faith belongs to the divine mind, the higher mind. It's an aspect of it, and belief is of the lower mind. So perhaps we should put this here so that we can list them. So this one is the higher, but please remember that these are relative terms. Relativity is definitely important here. where does this belief come from? And where does the faith come from? Faith is twofold in its nature. Its root is in the immortal self, and it is dependent on knowledge. So this fire of knowledge allows direct perception. We know when we look at things what they are in their internal aspect. Our decisions are based on knowledge, so it is the truth we are following. So what decision we make is correct decision, and we're following truth. Where is this? This is in the imperishable center of every human being. So it's in the heart. So this aspect of our life that goes towards justice, impartiality, charity, it comes from this imperishable center of the heart. But the other, even though the feeling is right that these things exist, the belief system turns it around and makes a mockery of this faith we have, because it is based on an anthropomorphic God system that does not really exist in the universe. It is, HPB tells us, if we need to find out who and what we are, we need to learn how the mind works. That this clause that was inclusive in the declaration, where it says that we're going to look at the psychic aspects of nature and the cosmos and discern this, and by studying comparative religion come to an understanding of it, is an internal process. We're not looking outside of ourselves. Mr. Judge tells us, turn the critical eye inward. Learn the powers of the mind within yourself and see which side you're at. So this is a relative position. At this stage of our development, we use both, but who has that subtle internal perception to decide which one is at work at that particular time we're making a decision? Now, if the divine mind is active and it is invited in, we said last week that it cuts a groove into the personality, into the lower, and slowly raises it up. But in order for this to be constantly active, it has to yoke itself to the buddhi. Buddhi is a colorless principle. It can do both. It can kill as well as give light or life. So if we are doing the divine in us, it is yoked to buddhi. What does buddhi do? It comes and cuts all difficulty asunder. So it is this internal light, which is the divine in us, that comes to our aid, because we have this altruistic faith in whatever it is we are doing, because it is based on conviction, it is based on truth, and it is based on reality. Not the reality of the societal norm, but the reality of the inner man. So, when we go to the belief system, then, as we said, it is based on this anthropomorphic God theory, vicarious atonement, and faith. But that faith is a blind belief. It is not true faith of the inner individuality. So, we are told to follow without asking questions. This 21st century is not going to carry that belief system, because it is based on dogma. It is human mind creating it, whereas this faith is in the imperishable center of the heart. It is always there. When activated, it comes to our aid. Miracles do not exist. Masters laugh at the word and how it is used. because we have to understand the powers of nature and how those powers translate their internal relativity into our natures. So this is a little bit of a recap. So our ignorance then comes not knowing the inner dynamics of our own nature. And faith is the cohesive power of nature, and it is the machinery of the occult cosmos. This is important to understand. The occult cosmos are the invisible aspect of the cosmos, and it is there. This cohesive power is inherent in Akasha. So when we have a divine faith in doing something good for the general goodness of the whole, that occult power is working with us because we are in sync with it. So it aids us in our effort. And this brings us to brotherhood. It is extremely important to understand this occult power of the cosmos when it comes to establishing a brotherhood of truth, a nucleus that is going to center its ideology on the truth that was given to the world, which we still follow, and understand that the will, this will is co-eternal with the faith we have, because it is a power of the higher mind. The will of the masters is what keeps this movement alive, and we need to keep that in the forefront. The founders were the masters. HPB and Mr. Judge were the two colleagues that were their physical representatives in the universe, bringing this truth in their philosophy into the world for us to learn and to follow. She says, don't follow me, follow the path given out by the masters. Last week we had talked about this a little bit by the statement that we cannot get to the masters by just desiring to do so, because it would be like that anthropomorphic God, we would bow. We need to understand what, who, and how their powers work. And it was stated that the master's statement is, I have all of humanity in my heart. There is no other statement that can be as impersonal as that one. His concern is for all humanity, not just part of it, all of it. As HPV came to the whole world, so the whole humanity is in that masters, or the brotherhood of the masters have that in their forefront. This is what they are working. So the creative faculty of the higher mind then has to envision the ideal as to what this change is going to bring, and the promise of it be kept alive in the heart. To keep faith means to hold the vision and steadfastly stay with it. So steadfastness is a quality of the higher mind. It's constant, and it is steadfast, and it holds it. It does not move, in other words. So this we must also remember. Now, we will move on to enthusiasm and fanaticism. This is very much needed today. When the masters sent their representative into the world, they brought the ideology. the ideology has been in existence for over 100 years. And the ideology eventually then demands that new words come into our vocabulary to express the ideal. Their concern was not with the words, but with the ideology at that time. However, HPB decided to bring this into the Western world with the English language. And she says, paucity, this is her word, not mine. I had to look it up, of the English language to express spiritual ideas. In other words, it's very limited. It does not have the words because it was for a commercial people. The language was for the commercial people. So as the need arises, she says, the new words will come into being. She brought the Sanskrit words out to give it an impulse in the right direction. And also, when you look at the secret doctrine, she never uses the same words twice. The secret doctrine is like a dictionary. This student sits with the dictionary to see what exactly is she getting at with certain words. And this research finally has brought it to the forefront as to why it was done, because she wanted to give us the lost meaning of the words in their original form when they were first brought out, because as culture moves along, the meaning of the words change. But in order to understand the philosophy, we need to go to the original meaning of these words. Enthusiasm and fanaticism being the dual powers of the mind. Antipodal, because one is divine and the other one is infernal. Both exist in us, because higher, I'm repeating a little bit for you, the higher mind is the divine aspect, the lower mind, comparatively speaking, the intellectual mind, then leads us to the infernal side of things. So enthusiasm, she tells us, in its primal meaning, means from the Greek inspiration by divine afflatus or by the presence of God. So the inner aspect of the individual, in other words, is present, or it is able to act through the personality, if you wish. And she tells us that in Syria there was a sect in the 4th century who called themselves enthusiasts, because they said by perpetual prayer to that higher aspect, ascetic practices, and contemplation, which is sitting at meditation, that they could be inspired to show this Holy Spirit or the powers of the higher mind through themselves. Generally then, this meaning is not what is given to that word, because if you look it in the dictionary, that definition is not there, that one is this side, because why? Physical science does not believe that the powers of the higher mind actually exist. We have a long way to go to convince the general public that this is how the mind functions. So, impassioned emotion or sporadic outbursts. This is what we have to compare to understand which side we're talking about. Enthusiasm is constant. The higher powers of the mind are constant. It shows control. It is not sporadic at all. And when people say, I'm terribly enthusiastic about this thing, it's not really that enthusiasm we are talking about. It is the frivolous aspect of the enthusiasm, because it changes. Our attention is here and then it moves over here. I was enthused about that, but now I have dropped it, I have moved somewhere else. That is not the true meaning of enthusiasm. She has these 3 words that I wish that you would please carry it with you today. Where the higher mind is concerned, she has firmness. 1. And constancy is 2. And the third one is control. These are aspects of the higher mind. And as a result, she tells us, it is also very unselfish. This is an N. Selfish. Why? We just said its concern is for the welfare of the whole, not for the parts. And it becomes enlightened devotion to the ideal, because it's the ideal from the core of the heart that gives us this impulse. And as this process goes on and we are doing the inner life's demand of us, then this aspect is what exerts itself. It comes to the aid, and then the occult cosmos with the heart work together. It's for the good of all. And she reminds us there's only one spirit in the universe, not two. One spirit. We all come from that same source. There's only one mind field, chitta. And during manifestation, both of them work in two aspects. The spirit and matter, because a spirit cannot show itself unless it comes through a vehicle, and lower mind and higher mind in conjunction with that for the spirit to make or exhibit its powers in the universe. If it is directed through the higher mind, the potency of the spirit is universal, impersonal, pure, and so it is rightly termed enthusiasm. This is what we have to keep in mind, what enthusiasm really means. I will repeat it. The creative powers of the spirit or the mind are universal, impersonal, pure, and is termed enthusiasm. But flowing through the lower mind, look what it does. It becomes personal, selfish, impure, and leads towards fanaticism, because it is inverted. The powers of the higher mind become inverted. Through one, man then uplifts himself to the margins of divinity, really. This is the margin of divinity. What's behind here? Spirit. And the other one, we perpetuate crimes even if we don't call it that. Because if our actions are not for the whole, they're personal, they're selfish, we're out to get something for ourselves. The beneficent power then is the higher mind, fully lit, full of fire of devotion. And the other, when we look at historical events, and this student has been thinking quite a bit on that subject, we find that there is not one crime that cannot be caused by human minds putting the deity in that position of choice. In other words, the lower mind says mine is superior to the other ones. All religions come from the same core, so their root rests in divinity also. Every religion rests in divinity because its root is what? The secret doctrine, the secret doctrine of the ages, not just this book. This book is a very small portion of that philosophy, but the wisdom of the ages is the root. All religions come from it. because when you go to the original bringer of that philosophy into the world, you notice that there is an impersonality, a universality, a name that the initial prophet or teacher takes on to indicate the mission he or she has come to deliver into the world. And Zoroastrian name is such a one. Sankaracharya is another one. It's a title that the original bringer of that philosophy took, and all the others that come afterwards, because they are part of that initial impulse, take the same name because they're continuing that lineage. So this religious crusades that people undertake is for the destruction of some part of humanity, saying that they have the superior one, and we're going to now impose it on the rest of you. But HPB brought this knowledge out, saying that 20th century would see the destruction of the old form of thought, and that the new thought in time would replace it. But the 21st century has a different aspect to it. It is based on harmony and understanding of our inner powers and how we use them in the world. She also tells us that there is a very fine line of demarcation between these two. It is very subtle, and so they look same or similar. But she says there's a world of a gap in between the two things. How can we then remove the gap? It's the will of the individual who wants to know the truth that will work with this mind principle. It is not something that we can undertake sporadically. It is not something that we can take over intermittently, saying, okay, I will do it when I can. No. Its nature is constancy. The higher mind, in order to become operational in us, to use one of those space movies, operational, has to have this constancy exhibited in the aspect of life that we're living. Whatever it is that our attention or energy is drawn to, it has to be constant. We cannot say, I'm going to do it one day and not the next day. So that same principle applies when we sit at concentration, contemplation, and finally at meditation. It has to be done persistently and constantly. Every day you choose your 5 minutes, your 10 minutes, same hour, same place if you can, and concentrate your mind on one thing to the exclusion of everything else from the objective world. And the first speaker read Voice of the Silence. That is called dharana, again, the mind. Well, I kind of have run out of time, but I'm going to mention another one that is, I actually have about 10 more pages, but let's see. We talked about enthusiasm and fanaticism, and of course this then is the destructive power in the universe, because people will go and follow their lower mind dictates, and that is what all of the negativity in the universe comes from that. And the other one was receptivity and passivism. I will mention that for 5 minutes and then cut it off. I won't be able to deliver all of it. The mystery of the dual mind is in that statement, receptivity and passivism. The mystery of the mind, we are told, has to be learned through many lifetimes. It is an effort that we have to keep going, not in one life, but in successive lives. What is it that that statement has in it? that once this divine mind is active and it constantly goes towards purity, divinity, then Buddhi is active. The two are not yoked together, perhaps, but their affinity is there. So that when that affinity becomes permanent, that's when we remember. And this statement, where did the voice go? Here. Let's read it. This is the beginning of the Gita. And it says here, before the soul can comprehend may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united. Who's the silent speaker? The higher. Just as the form to which the clay is modeled, the physical body, is first united with the potter's mind. Remember the Egyptian potter who created our physical on the potter? For then the soul will hear and will remember. These are internal powers, the inner ear and the inner eye. These are internal powers that go with this divinity side of us. And once they're active, this is when we know, we know. Knowledge is part of it, okay? And then to the inner ear will speak the voice of the silence. As said before, the initiation process into the mysteries is an internal process, has nothing to do with externalities. It's the divine soul that makes itself presence known to the personality that is informing in that particular life. In other words, it has thrown its lot with the personality. It's going to inform the personality in the hope that it's going to uplift the personality. What does that mean? The mind then is uplifted. The alchemical body, whatever comes into it, is uplifted, because we are constantly taking stuff in and releasing it into the air. So we're uplifting the whole of nature through this alchemical construction and constant change that takes in us. So it is very important to understand it. What does that involve? What does that involve? What does it involve? Impressions. It's impressing us. The mind is being impressed. Can we really learn anything without this impressing going on? We are constantly impressed. The teacher's mind is impressing the student's mind. What does that necessitate? Receptivity. We have to have this ability to receive it. In other words, you have to become ready to receive it. Isn't that statement relevant then? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, this is an internal process. Maybe there's an external teacher as well, but this is the first line of defense is always internal. The higher self is always in the heart, and it is ready to inform us when we are receptive to receive it, is what that says to this student's mind. So this is very important to understand, that we're not going to go sit in some corner and expect somebody to come and inform us. We can be informed continuously if we are aligning ourselves with the higher aspects of us, the higher mind, the spiritual potency of the human being then is being shed through. So I will read this statement again. I said it at the beginning. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man is a private undertaking to be pursued by each within the sanctuary of his own soul. It is independent study of mind and heart, because the two are together, the beginning of which marks entry to the path of chelaship. We're going to become foot soldiers at the bottom, because the masters require their foot soldiers in the universe. Wherever the thought struggles to be free, in force, they are present there. And look at all the stuff that's going in the world today, where the thought is trying to become free. A lot of fighting for spiritual freedom is going on. But first, the mind must be free to express itself. Without that freedom, the spiritual freedom cannot follow. And this is from Mr. Judge. In order to learn and grow in knowledge of the higher truths, this impression receiving has to be present. He goes on to say that up to a certain point, all students of magic or occultism, or the ones who want to know the invisible powers of nature, that's what occultism is, journey together. By and by is reached a place where two roads meet, or where the common path divides. By one, a man goes to adeptship, by the other to mediumship. And there's a tremendous difference between these two. And he's asking us, do you know which path you are treading? Have you sat in concentration and discovered through your thought processes where you stand? This is the key. This student has said many a time that through this process is the learning when you say no to what comes into your mind, because you're going to be receptive to receive the truth. But what about the stuff that is untruth? Because the psychic nature of the astral world is there. Through suggestion is how the politicians change opinion in the world. Do we have the stand power to resist it? Not go with the general, not go with the popular belief system, which is based on anthropomorphic God theory, as well as vicarious atonement and blind belief? Are we going to make a stand for the ideal that is the vision for the future? Now, this means that we are active, not passive. Psychic energy requires passivity to come in. And psychics then open themselves up for all of the evil in the universe to find a channel through them, because passivity is not where we need to be. Manas, the higher manas, or the spiritual quality of the higher manas, flows from knowledge based upon right perception of things. It is the power to receive impressions without being passive, an extremely active condition, wherein the perceiver weighs and chooses what he will admit. Passivity, on the other hand, is inactive, undiscriminating, and bad. It is characteristic of the lower manas to consider naught, which when abnormal, it goes towards insanity. Its power is like a sponge-like. It receives the impressions with no problem, but it cannot choose. This is the lower mind. It is the tool of the medium and the unwary disciple who does not sit at concentration trying to figure out where the mind is, which part is active. So, the generality of humanity, like ship without a rudder, is swept this way and that way because they follow. They don't have this stand power. Then the last question I will read. Have we the courage to charge the tide of Kali Yuga with its insidious currents of propaganda, its undertow of false religious thought? And everyone has to take that in and answer it for themselves. Socratic method is questioning by the teacher, where the teacher is making an effort to induce thinking and to raise the pupil's mind to an active state and tune it to a higher vibration. This is what we must do also within ourselves. The higher mind, higher vibration. Receptivity implies knowledge, awareness, and control. It requires many years and many lives of effort and trial. The end of this process is adeptship, the mark and insignia of one who has gone through the training and experience which have caused all the unseen powers in him to develop and conferred gifts that look godlike to his struggling brother below. Such then is the nature of the mastermind in us. Now we will open it to questions. Yes, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I don't know.
Speak up a little bit, please.
I'm not sure if this is so much an observation that could require your response by way of a question, but I'm noticing when you list fairness, constancy, and control, and as far as I believe you stated that was necessary with the higher mind. Being an astrologer, I noticed that those are kind of like earthly qualities. I mean, if we're looking at the elemental characteristics of the world, earth, fire, air, and water, I see those definitions, those qualities as earthly, as they apply to what, if we're talking about the higher mind, as what would be normally an air-like quality. And I just find that interesting. So I don't know if it's a question so much as if you wanted to like elaborate on that.
Okay, your question is that firmness, constancy, control, and unselfishness look like.
I didn't include that unselfishness in it.
Just the first three.
Constancy and control.
Control are earthly qualities, you're saying.
Very much earthly qualities.
What do you mean by earthly qualities?
Qualities that manifest very well in a physical sense. In a physical sense.
Well, we are on earth.
Yes.
We have a physical body. The spirit cannot exhibit itself without a vehicle. This vehicle is the temple of Aditi, the highest on earth, which is our spiritual soul. And its manifestation has to come through the physical. It cannot manifest in the air. What would you then be describing if you're describing the powers of air? Occult cosmos. That's the power of the occult cosmos. The invisible cosmos has that power, because if you go to the basics of this philosophy, deity is omnipotent and omnipresent in everything and everywhere. So not one spot can be outside of it. We're not talking about dogma, we're talking about reality of the philosophy that was the master's aim to bring out into the universe for us to benefit from. So the occult cosmos has that power. It's there for us to use if we can align ourselves with the higher aspect of ourselves, because that's the higher aspect of the universe also. The lower aspect is the psychic aspect. The spiritual aspect cannot be taken in and used for selfish purposes. And air, fire, air, water, and earth are the four constituent elements of our universe. But it is definitely stated that they only belong to earth, that in the other globes of the solar system, substance exists at a higher level. For that reason, she tells us, atoms are not physical units. Atoms are what? Yeah, they are. They are psycho-spiritual. They have two aspects. Why? Because they constitute this temple also. And this temple has two powers of the mind working together. The mind principle is one, but the powers work in two aspects or in two different ways. We said that the divine aspect works from the core of the heart, from the imperishable center. The spiritual center of the heart is imperishable because that was imprinted at the beginning of the Manvantara by the Dhyani Buddhas who came to initiate this process so that the truth would not be lost, that we would eventually have it to remember and rely upon. Okay, so it's always there. So this aspect, the divine aspect of the higher mind, brings this out into what? Into the world through this physical body that I have, the vehicle of the highest. It cannot do so any other way. But the lower mind flip-flops. Today it goes with this idea, tomorrow with a different idea. That's what its characteristic is. Whereas the firmness, to stay firm and not be moved, it takes courage to stay firm, and a steadfastness in you. Your character has to exhibit these qualities in order for you to make a stand and for people not to sway you back and forth. And the other one is control, because the higher mind controls the functions of the lower when it is permitted to come in and guide your personality. Your personality is who you are. My personality is Tunjai Densler in this life. I have a name, it's called Namarupa, name and form. But without it, the divine cannot exhibit its characteristics. So these are not of the lower mind. These are of the higher divine mind in human beings. And its characteristics is this. And the other one is unselfishness, because its concern is for the for the unity for all beings, not for the personality itself. The personality, in other words, has to come to that point where it says, I will sacrifice for the benefit of the all. This is not a one lifetime effort. It takes many lifetimes. We can move in that direction, but it takes courage and a lot of concentration and effort for us when the general and popular is not the same as this. You have to have courage to stand with your ideal. And the ideal is the vision you hold in the higher mind, because the higher mind has the whole plan of evolution, because it is imprinted on the akasha, on the homogeneous substance of our universe, and it remains there. It doesn't get vanished. It's there. And so the master's mind works with the divine mind, and that program, the universal program of evolution, is what he follows, and what he implants is for that. That lower mind looks at things in part, but the other, totality. So you can only exhibit them as you are on earth. When that faculty is active, it moves it through. She tells us, for instance, water is not just H2O. It's not just hydrogen and oxygen. She says there are a lot of molecular structures in water that are not visible to us at this time because we cannot see it. They're infinitesimal. They're so small. So don't look at the appearances. If you want to know and have real knowledge, you have to look on the inside, on the spiritual aspect, or what is it on the inside of it. If you could look at it and see it, she says that it becomes possible to us to do that when the inner aspect, the inner eye, we talked about the inner eye and the inner ear. One without the other does not work. She tells us in the Voice of the Silence, if you have to have both operational, both active, in other words, for you to perceive on the inner lines of your being what its essence is. What is the essence of water? What is the essence of fire? Because that's the quality it exhibits on the physical plane, but it has an inner reality to it. And to see that, you need to have those powers open and function. Does that help you?
Very much so. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, dear.
On the level of receptivity,
Yes.
The inner ear and the inner eye
Yes.
being active
Yes.
creates a condition of receptivity so that there's an ability to choose.
Receptivity is a quality of the higher mind. It's the impressions that you receive that you have to think about. Where is the impression coming from? Because if the incoming impression is not from the higher aspect of you, you need to be able to differentiate it. And this student has learned, when sitting quietly, certain things come in. And Mr. Judge has an article, I'm diverging a little bit to make it a little bit understandable for you. Dweller at the Threshold, it is called. You might want to read it. Dweller at the Threshold. He says there is a dweller at the threshold for each human being. What does that mean exactly? All the negative aspects coalesce when we are trying to move in this direction. It becomes a force that's going to oppose this path. Because why? We have given it that impulse through many, many lifetimes. Suddenly we are saying, hey, we don't want you anymore. What should we do? The process described is that we make it beneficent. What we have made maleficent, we have to change to beneficent. In other words, if we put that impulse in it, we're going to change it, make it better, and then release them. That's the key to this process we are talking about. That it's not going to just disappear because you don't want it anymore. It's there, okay? And in fact, they coalesce. So, if that aspect is also always there, it's going to drag it down a little bit, is it not? Because it's a negative force in me. I made it that way. I am responsible. This is the thing that we have to acknowledge, that we're responsible for our actions. Thought, speech, action. One follows from the other. And Buddha said, it is because of ignorance that we don't know how to do things. Ignorance is there. It exists. But we can change it, we can eliminate it, and we can obtain knowledge, which is the birthright of each human being, because it's here. It's with me. The knowledge is with me also. It's internal. I have to bring it out. I have to allow the higher aspect to cut a groove into it and raise it up. Until you invite that higher aspect, it cannot come in. Its nature is divine. It's spiritual. It's pure. It's of the spirit. It doesn't exist on the physical plane. This is what we must understand. So on the physical plane, you have all these psychic forces, not only outside, but also within yourself. And this is what we need to differentiate. The passivity aspect belongs to the lower mind because it accepts impressions like a sponge. It comes in very easily. But what is coming in? Do you stop to think and say, hey, I don't want to think that way. It's negative. It doesn't go towards brotherhood. It doesn't go for the welfare. This student has those thoughts. I'm being honest. But I have learned to reject it at the threshold of my mind when it tries to come in. I don't have to accept it. I have the right to refuse it. I don't have to be passive. I can be receptive to what comes in, but the higher mind has that ability to look at it, to decide whether it is the knowledge aspect of it or what? Belief aspect of it, and make a decision right there to say, I don't want it. I'm asking for my higher divine mind to assist. And when you invite it in, it does assist. If you ask a question one day and you sit there just totally flabbergasted, no answer is there. You're asking it and you feel like, wow, I'm not getting anywhere today. Close it up, and the next day, sometimes when you wake up, it's clear and sharp right there. You have the answer. But where did it come from? Obviously, to sift it down when we go to sleep. The higher influences the lower during sleep. It's there. It definitely is there. But you have to make that decision for yourself. You have to learn to question what is coming in. Don't just allow it to sponge-like come in. If it is not to your liking, you have the right to say, I'm not thinking that way. I don't want it anymore.
Well, that raises the issue of will.
Yes, this will.
And the power of will.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking from the standpoint of the individual coming up into the level of consciousness of the higher mind. The will, for instance, if the lower mind, if we've created a lower mind,
We haven't created it. That's the way it works.
if we've activated it,
No, that's the way it works. That's the way it functions when
Okay.
we are in incarnation.
well, what was it that you were referring to? Whatever it was that you were referring to that you created.
Dweller at the threshold. That is your negative thoughts. The things that do not go toward unity that you have put into your being are all going to coalesce.
Right. So,
And they are going to become the opposition party, just like in the family, okay? This student, when first started this philosophy, had opposition from the family. We were told, you're joining a cult. This is what the Baptist mind is able to perceive. Do you have the stamina to stand solid?
when one is dwelling at the threshold, when one dwells at the threshold,
What do you mean with when one dwells at the threshold?
at the threshold of choosing to move towards the higher mind, the soul consciousness. When one is dwelling at that threshold of connecting with the higher self,
You are connected at all times
consciously,
to your
when
higher
one
self.
dwells at the threshold consciously to connect with the higher self, so that one can control the negative aspects that has developed, negative characteristics that have developed throughout the lifetimes. When one dwells at that threshold, it has to have, in order to make the leap, the step, it has to have the power of will
Okay,
to break the threads, the connections with the negative characteristics.
you have
habits.
to reverse your thinking process. You have to reverse your thinking process. The lower aspect can never reach to the higher. It doesn't work that way. It's the higher that comes and uplifts the lower. It isn't the other way around.
Okay.
And this is for understanding purposes only. There's only one mind. This is the mode it works in. You, by your thinking, speech, and action, are either doing one or the other.
Right.
Okay, so if you are charitable, okay, by the way, the lesson has come to an end, and those of you who need to be somewhere else may. But I will continue to answer your questions if you wish. As we said, there's only one mind, one spirit. This is our lower aspect working when we think that we're all separate from one another, because this is how the lower mind looks at things, in parts, in pieces. But the other mind, the divine mind, goes with the universal plan, which is the imprint on the Akashic light of the divine mind, the universal mind we are talking about, not anything else, the universal mind that works for the benefit of all. We said that impulse is imprinted in every human heart.
Okay.
Every human heart that has that imprint, imperishable it is called, imperishable. It will always be there because it is imperishable. Imperishable. Okay? So this is there. This is my divine heart. I always go here. This is my physical heart. But it reflects the other one. This reflects it. So if my concern is understanding the philosophy, making it my own so that I can share it, on which side am I? Here. I am concerned for the benefit of the all. I want to share this knowledge with the others. I don't want it for myself. I want to be able to help the few that I can reach, whether it is telepathically or otherwise. That is the divine mind working. It is firm, constant, it's showing control because it's persistent effort, and it is unselfish. I don't want it for myself. But Mr. Judge says that's when you gain the most, when you don't want it for yourself, because then the divine aspect plus the occult cosmos come to your aid. Because there's no separation. It's just one whole. All of us, one whole. Everyone has their own space in this whole. Not one of us is more important than the other dot in the circle. We all are equal. In the mind of the deity, we are all equal. It is in the human mind that this inversion occurs because of this lower aspect. If we make it personal, selfish, materialistic, this is where we're working from. Say somebody comes and says to you, I want you to give me $500. I need it to pay my rent. What would you do? Because HPB says the other way you can also come to know what it is that you're doing is, are you only concerned with your immediate family, or if your resources allow, are you moving out of the family? Because then you're saying my family unit is what? My community, my nation, the world at large, because we are the future philanthropists of the world, the theosophical students. This is what is expected of us. Because why? We're going to be foot soldiers wherever it is we are needed. There will come a time when this struggle we're going through now to become, to evolve, will achieve that end. But we can also go wrong, because Mr. Judge continuously batters us with this statement that the path is one up to a certain point, but then it diverges. It's like this, and then it goes like so. Why is he always telling us? because this is where we are. We're going all in this direction because we want to learn, we want to help, we want to be useful, we want to be charitable. We're all in this path. But when we come here, he says, the terrible silence is going to ask you, whom do ye serve this day? I sat with that frightened out of my wits for a very long time. I hope that is not on.
It is on.
Because I said, what is the terrible sound of the silence? Why is it terrible? Why is it terrible? So there will come this moment. What is silence? The core of your heart is silence. So that heart one day is going to ask us, whom do ye serve this day? And according to your answer, you're either going to go into the passive side, which is the psychic energy, or you're going to go to the spiritual side, where your main objective is whole of humanity's welfare, because that is the program that is imprinted in the imperishable center of the heart. Yes?
Well, I thank you for that. But what I was thinking of is a society like the one that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
The society that we live in is inherently gears us towards selfishness. You take somebody like a developer and sees an opportunity because he's a capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees an opportunity, and in order for him to realize his dream or his vision that he justifies as being a better situation, he puts people out of jobs because he takes over their corporation, and he takes their jobs and he takes their resources of that corporation, and he uses that for himself, and he finds a way of selling that and distributing it somewhere, and as a result making lots of money for himself and devastating the lives of the individuals who worked in that community or worked in that corporation. Obviously the lower self.
Lower mind.
Now he is driven by a vision that is ultimately unselfish, but in our society
that is not unselfish. None of it is unselfish.
He's driven by a vision that's ultimately selfish, but we live in a society that gears towards that.
Okay.
Selfish.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what we said.
So in a society when one dwells at the threshold of choosing which way to go, to the higher self or to the lower self, one has to have the will or have some inclination towards going to the higher self. And even if one does have that, it has to have the strength and the power to overcome the circumstances, like his society, like his education, like his home training, right, which may have been geared towards selfishness, to then go to some other direction, which is towards the higher self.
Okay.
So that process, that choice, that choosing, it would seem to the student would be a very slow process that would require constancy, firmness, and some degree of control and will to remain moving in a direction of the higher self opposed to up to the other direction.
Okay, every day you're given opportunity to work in the universe in one fashion or another. If this ideal is in your heart and you're exhibiting this ideal in your thought, in your speech, and in your deed, you can go about and do the work. But the Buddha, the great Buddha, said, what is the motive behind the action? Is it to benefit that area you're working in, or is it to suck its resources out? And your speech, are you harmful to those you're working with, or do you uplift them with your speech? and your actions. He says, a person who has a livelihood should not ever harm a single thing. Not a bee, not a human being, not a flower. In other words, if your livelihood is not beneficent, don't do it. Find another one that can express beneficence to all those around you. And look at that builder example you had given. How much more beneficent would it be for society for that builder to have units that are affordable? A lot of societal norm has gone so much out of reach of the generality of the population, which shows that we have gone towards the extremes. The higher mind is constant, it is humble, it does not go towards extremes. And when you show generosity of heart and you say, okay, I am not going to have $2 billion profit from this project, I will have $500,000 profit from this project. The rest of it I'm distributing to the general public by making these units affordable to them so that they can become land owners in their own term. That is also a choice of that builder. And when you look at the mansions today, the space in them can accommodate a whole community, let alone one family.
That's right.
So we have gone towards the extremes. Our forefathers, when they first came, they used to build a barn type of home where everybody slept in one section of that unit. They had a kitchen in another, bathrooms outside. This society has gone tremendous change, but we must never forget where we came from, that how little we had, but that we were spiritual and community oriented, because the forefathers understood masonry. Not only that, the masters gave their countenance to the Declaration of the United States because they saw this vista opening up for democratic rule, for humans to make a difference in each other's lives. But if we have moved away from that, does that mean we cannot go back to it? Do we have to go with the extreme? Or are we going to say, no, the Buddha says we don't need more things because they don't make us prosperous. They make us crave things. We need to have a higher use of the things that we have. Look how wise he was. He came 500-600 BC and he gave us this ideal that today is still true. So we will finish it here, and
next week, what do we do? The cell? Is it? No, the cycle. Law of cycles.
the law of cycles is our next talk, and we invite all of you to participate. Thank you,
will it
everyone.
be?
You have already
The
made.
address. The address. 4865.
It's 4865 Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, in Bethesda.
www.
Thank you very much, everyone.
www.ulcc.org.
I'm going up